So this story starts right here in that classroom up there. In fact, it starts a little bit before that, because you see, as a school teacher, I figured that if kids saw things that were real, or if they were involved in situations, they would remember more and they would therefore learn more. And so sometimes I would even use drama. So we would set up a drama, so we would do the drama and the kids would be involved in that, then they'd really understand what the situation was. But sometimes I wouldn't tell them that it was actually a drama, but they would still learn from it because it appeared real to them. Now, as a school teacher, quite often you're asked to look after student teachers. And in this particular year, probably the late 80s, I was asked to look after this young girl by the name of Christine for about 2 weeks. And during that time, she had to do a social studies project called Adapting to Change. And it was all about humans adapting to change if they move countries or if they move environments. And I told her I had a few ideas in regards to how we might dramatise that to help the kids learn. This was one of those dramas where we weren't going to tell them that it was a drama. And so I told her the idea and she liked it, and so we went ahead with it. Now, the other thing that had happened in the meantime is that Christine had shown me that she'd just been to Canada, and she had these beautiful, beautiful photos of all this ice and snow and all that sort of stuff. And so we used that as part of the story. Now, the next day I came into the classroom and I said to the kids, did anybody see on the news last night, on the SBS News, the amazing story of the Americans who've been doing some underground nuclear testing in this place called Novaya Zemlya in the top of Russia? And when they went back and they put their infrared cameras down, they found this huge hotspot. And when they went down there, they found that there has been a race of people living under the ice, probably for centuries, but now their whole environment's been destroyed and they've got to move them out of that area into somewhere else around the world. And the American government are responsible for doing that. Did anybody see that? And 2 kids put up their hand. You can always rely in grade 4 of 2 kids to put up their hand, even if they haven't seen it. I'm saying, oh, that's right. It was amazing, boys, wasn't it? Now, the next day I come back into the classroom and I say to the kids, did anybody see the SBS News last night? And the part where the guy who's the chief of those people who are under the ground now, they've got to move them to somewhere else around the world, he's actually been taken around the world. Who saw that? And the same 2 kids put up their hands again. And I said, the exciting thing is he's coming to Australia, but not only to Australia, to Victoria. Now, I believe he might even be going to some schools. So I have applied to see if this guy, apparently his name is called Mr. Nyetti. Get the last part of that. Yeti, abominable snowman. And so I've applied to see if we can get him to come to our school. And the kids are now starting to get excited about it. The next day I come and I say, boys, you know how we applied for that? He's actually coming in here, and because I've applied, he's going to be coming into our classroom in a couple of days' time. And the kids are now ecstatic about the whole thing, even though nobody has seen this story, and the 2 kids are still putting up their hand every time I mention something about it. So to set this all up, I go and see the vice principal of the school, Lee Murray.
That'd be me.
And Lee must have seen me coming, because as I walk towards him, he says,
"What are you up to this time?"
So I tell Lee the idea, and he loves the idea straight away, and he is the one who's going to become Mr. Nyetti. So we're going to dress him up in these clothes, put a wig on him, some dark glasses on him, put him in a wheelchair, and then bring him into our classroom. Now, at the same time, I went up to the senior school and I came across a lady that I knew that the kids wouldn't know, and she came down into our classroom pretending to be a linguist, somebody who knows a little bit about the language of Novaya Zemlya. And she starts teaching the kids some of these imaginary words so that they can have conversation with Mr. Nyetti when he comes into our classroom. So she's saying things like Nesa Muska, and they're all going Nesa Muska, and she writes it down. She goes, that means hello, Mr. Nyetti. And they're going, oh. So they're writing these things down in their social studies books. Anyway, the day comes and the librarian comes in too. She's got a camera. She knows what's going on. She's almost wetting herself, sitting down on the side there watching what's going on. And so we roll Mr. Nyetti in, but we'd warned the kids, because he's been living underground for so long, we don't want to make too much noise, and we've turned the lights off to make it nice and dark for him. And they roll him in, and the boys are silent. And they've got these questions all prepared for him. So for the next half hour, the kids are asking him questions, and Lee's sitting there and he'll mumble to our linguist, oh, es morskira, but in the school. And she'll go, boys, I think what Mr. Nyetti's saying is, yes, it was very terrifying when blah, blah, blah. And so he would answer all these questions by this imaginary language, and she would interpret this imaginary language, and the kids are absolutely fascinated. Now, at the end of it, this happened quite spontaneously. One of the boys puts up his hand and said, just what is it? He said, can we take a photo with Mr. Nyetti? And I said, I don't know if he knows what cameras are. And so I looked to the linguist and I said, could you try and explain to Mr. Nyetti what that's all about? And so she whispers in his ear, and he sort of nods, and she goes, I think he understands, so yeah, let's do that. So we get 4 boys, and they stand behind Mr. Nyetti, And then the librarian takes this photo with a flash, and Lee quite spontaneously goes, "Ah, ah, ah," and he starts to panic, and the kids are jumping back and everybody's absolutely in fear. And I said, "Oh, look, we better take him out now. I think that was probably a little bit too much for him." So we roll Lee out the door and heads off, and the place just goes ballistic. The kids are that excited, and what happened, and it was just amazing. We talked about it and we explained how difficult it was for him to change environments and how hard it must have been for him. Now, in the meantime, Lee's gone down to the staff room and has started to take his wig off and his glasses off and all the rest of it off and stand up out of his wheelchair, but we took a series of photos as he was doing that. The next day, I got the photos developed and I put them in a row on the ledge of the blackboard. Didn't have a whiteboard back then, on the blackboard. And I just waited to see what would happen because the boys were working. And one kid comes up to one of those, you know, the sharpeners, you used to stick a pencil in and you wind it round. And I see him walk up and he's doing this, and then he looks over and he spots his photo. And he walks across to my table and he goes, "Mr. Ramsden, was Mr. Nyetti, was that Mr. Murray?" I said, "Yeah, it was." And he goes, "Oh." And he just goes and sits down. I thought, "Oh, that was weird." Then another kid comes up about 5 minutes later. Bit of a different response. Wait a minute, Mr. Ramsden!" And suddenly the place just exploded, and I explained to the kids what had happened, and it was absolutely hilarious. But the learning that came in the next couple of weeks was absolutely amazing. And that was one of those times where drama was pretty dramatic because they didn't know it was a drama. So did any of you see that story on the SBS News back in the late 80s? There were some questions asked of those two young boys who put their hand up a few times by their friends in the next few days.